مرحبا واهلا وسهلا فيكم بالحلقه السابعه من بودكاست عدالتي من المركز السوري للعداله والمساءلة. انا كرم شاملي بنضم لكم بشكل مباشر من برلين عبر مجموعه اينتي الاخباريه ومن خلال البث المباشر على صفحه المركز السوري للعداله والمساءلة. مثل ما عودناكم، هذا البودكاست بيهتم بتغطيه محاكمه الطبيب السوري علاء أمين، الطبيب المتهم بارتكاب جرائم ضد الإنسانية أثناء تواجده وخدمته بالمشافي العسكرية بسوريا. لحد الآن المحكمة بفرانكفورت لا زالت تستمع للمدعي الثاني بهي المحاكمة، فلهيك وبسبب تعليمات المحكمة للأسف ما فينا نحكي أي تفاصيل عن عن حيثيات هي الشهادة لحد ما ينتهي المدعي الثاني من شهادته. بس كون ما فينا نخبركم عن عن هي المحاكمة، في موضوع كتير مهم حابين نخبركم عنه، ومن خلال مقابل مع ضيفتنا لهي الحلقة زميلتنا من المركز السوري للعدالة والمساءلة نسمة باشي. هو بيتعلق بانتهاكات السلطات اليونانية لحقوق الإنسان اللي بتتعلق بطالبي اللجوء يلي بالطرق من خلال الجزر اليونانية أو من خلال البر باتجاه أوروبا. كيف السلطات اليونانية أساءت معاملتهم، وكيف سواء هن بالبحر وتم إعادتهم أو حتى بعد وصولا على الأراضي اليونانية. من دون ما أطول عليكم، بس حابب أخبركم أنه هي الحلقة باللغة الإنجليزية وتم تسجيلها يوم الخميس الماضي، فلهيك حتكون مترجمة. بس إذا حتستمعوا من خلال سبوتيفاي بالمستقبل أو أبل بودكاست أو جوجل بودكاست كرمال الترجمة، فيكم تتابعوها من خلال الفيديو على صفحة المركز السوري للعدالة والمساءلة ومجموعة أينتي الإخبارية. وهلأ رح نعرض هاي المقابلة وودعكم للحلقة القادمة. تحياتي. Joining us from DC, my colleague Nسمة Bashir. Good morning, Nسمة.
Good morning, Karam. Thanks for having me.
Nسمة does speak Arabic, but for this episode, she opted to do it in English, but hopefully, as she promised in future episodes, she'll be joining us in Arabic. Nسمة, thank you so much for making the time. How about you go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers?
Of course, and thanks for having me, Karam. So my name is Nسمة Bashir. I'm a legal officer with the Syria Justice and Accountability Center. I've been with SJAC for about 2 years now. I think next month is going to be my 2-year anniversary. So before I was a legal officer, I was a legal fellow, and I came to SJAC from the International Criminal Court, where I was working for a judge in the appeals chamber of the ICC.
Oh, wow, and happy anniversary, I guess.
Thank you.
So I just want to say that our topic of discussion today is not relevant or related to what you guys are used to, universal jurisdiction or the trial of Allah in Frankfurt. But this is also a very important and significant topic that touches all Syrians, especially those who made it to Europe via the Greek shores. And Nسمة is very passionate about this topic, and she calls it her baby. So how about, Nسمة, you go ahead and cut to the chase and talk to us about this baby.
Yeah, of course. So it's definitely my baby because before I joined the International Criminal Court, I was working as an attorney on the Greek island of Lesbos and was providing legal services to refugees and asylum seekers there. So the drafting process was all based really on my own experiences. And I think having seen people suffer so much, it was really, really important to me to put forward this case. And I just was very fortunate that SJAC and our executive director, Mohammed Abdullah, had faith in me to put this forward. So essentially what we did is we submitted a communication to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, alleging that crimes against humanity have been committed against refugees along the Greek-Turkish border, as well as in Greek refugee camps. We call them reception and identification centers. And this basically stems from, again, my experiences as a lawyer, but also the mountain of documentation that have been coming out for the course of several years especially since the EU-Turkey deal that was made in March of 2016.
That's a big accusation, and definitely we've all seen, and we heard reports and we reported on things. I quoted a piece on Greek and Frontex pushbacks of migrant boats,
which we cited in the communication.
Yeah, but does that suggest that this is a systematic act by the Greek authorities or by Frontex, or could be just individual acts by, let's say, anti-refugee sort of category within the administrative authorities on the Greek shores, for example?
Yeah, this is a really important question. So in order to even have jurisdiction or standing before the International Criminal Court, we have to be able to prove that there was a widespread and systematic attack. And so essentially part of our argument is that all of these actions that have been taken by the Greek authorities, as well as by Frontex, the EU's border agency, all of those actions are all feeding towards their greater policy of deterring refugees from coming to Europe, or for those refugees who've already made it to Europe, basically making them so miserable that they are ready to leave, whether it's to go back to Turkey or to go back wherever. So it all feeds into this broader goal, and it manifests in different ways. It manifests in different laws, it manifests in policies, and it manifests in the actual procedures of these entities that are in charge of either the reception and identification centers or with the pushbacks themselves that are happening at sea and on land.
Can you give us some practical examples of what you witnessed or what you were told when you were in the Greek islands?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll paint a picture like this. We had a lot of refugees who would cross over at the sea border, so the nautical border between Turkey and Greece, headed towards Lesbos, and they would come in these dinghy boats. So basically, yep, we've all seen those famous pictures of, mostly they're orange and they're inflatable, and you can't imagine this weak little structure, across the Mediterranean, especially when the waves are high and the conditions are not good. And so people are stuffed onto these small boats, and as they're crossing over that nautical border, they're often approached by Greek authorities or Frontex authorities on their speedboats. And so what we saw happen quite often was that Greek authorities would try to stop these boats and physically push them back across the border. And they would do this in different ways. Sometimes they would take these really long metal poles and literally jab the boats across the nautical border. In other instances, we saw Greek authorities attach a rope to boats and tow them across the border.
By the border, you mean the international waters between Turkey and Greece through the Aegean. So they take them from Greek waters all the way to the international waters, and they abandon
into
them?
Turkish waters. Into
Turkish water, not even into international water. Okay.
No, we're going from Greek waters into Turkish waters, and literally
that's illegal.
That is illegal, exactly. And that's what we argue in our communication to the ICC, is that this violates several aspects of international law. The first being the right to non-refoulement, which is just a fancy way of saying that if you're a refugee and you have a fear of being persecuted somewhere, then when you flee somewhere else, you have a right to pitch your case and to say, listen, I have a very well-founded fear, and I should be heard out for my claims because I need to be safe and secure. And so in Greece, saying, listen, we're not even going to hear you out, we're just going to push you back across the border, whether it's at the northern land border or by sea, it's a very clear violation of international law.
So this is the illegal practice by actually towing these boats or migrants and force them to go back to Turkish waters after the deadly journey they undertook. But the legal obligation, according to the laws of the EU, is actually escorting these people, these arrivals from the rescue waters to safety, to be processed, and for their claims and cases to be heard, right?
Yes.
And you did mention the Greek authorities who are doing this, maybe the Greek Coast Guards, but you did also mention Frontex, which is a bigger umbrella of European Coast Guards. So does that implicate all of Europe in this action?
In a way, it does. So at the very least, who it implicates is those states that contribute to Frontex, EU's border agency. And that's a lot of states, including states like Germany. So states that we typically view as being quite pro-refugee. But on the contrary, in feeding into these processes, they're very much stating where they stand. And that's that we kind of need to limit how many refugees are coming in. And, you know, the European community is well aware of, you know, the fact that they are complicit in this. Let's acknowledge the reality of the situation. We all know what is going on with Frontex. Frontex knows what is going on. They have extremely high tech equipment, including drone surveillance equipment that is actually provided to them by private companies. I mean, we've looked at the tenders. So we've seen what these contracts look like, including one with an Israeli defense technology company. So they're purchasing all of this high tech equipment. And oftentimes with the drones, what happens is these special cameras are sending feeds to the headquarters in Poland. And so you can't really argue, if you're Frontex, that you didn't really see what was going on. There's just a lot of evidence out there that indicates that European authorities know what is going on, but in essence are choosing to ignore, because they know that they will be complicit in the crimes that are very blatantly being committed. So they'll say statements, and you know, they'll talk about why refugee rights are important and why Europe should be the bastion of human rights. But at the end of the day, in feeding into these processes and giving Frontex money, and by supporting the Greek border agency, they're very much complicit in these crimes.
Right. So this way we can exclude the claim that this could be individual acts by Greek authorities or Frontex, and this goes back to, or goes up to the highest chain of command within Frontex and within the Greek authorities.
Absolutely.
If I can take you back to the communication, which is really interesting, and you've done your fair share of reporting, of compiling testimonies, of polishing the findings and putting it in communication and providing to the ICC, right? So
correct.
What happened, or what is still happening, or what's going to happen next?
So it's a bit frustrating when you have to work with an international criminal court. And as someone who worked on the inside, I feel like I can definitely validate that frustration. And it's oftentimes shared by people who are working on the inside as well. But the processes are extremely slow. So what happens now is we submitted the communication, and it's up to the Office of the Prosecutor to decide whether or not they want to open a proper investigation. And so once that decision is made, you know, they'll send in their team, they'll send in their own members of the Office of the Prosecutor to interview people, to collect evidence, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, between the time of when we submit the communication and when the Office of the Prosecutor actually makes a decision, basically the Office of the Prosecutor is throwing out and they're going through and then throwing out the hundreds of other communications that they get. And usually what happens is the International Criminal Court holds these big meetings called the Assemblies of State Parties meetings. Basically, it's a meeting where all of the states that are involved in the ICC come together to discuss, you know, updates in the court and how things are going, and kind of future planning efforts. And usually before those big meetings, the Office of the Prosecutor will sift through and throw out a bunch of those frivolous communications. Well, now we are a year and a half after we submitted our communication, and we still haven't been thrown out. So I'm taking that as a you know, no news is good news situation. But at the end of the day, we knew that this was going to take a while. But you know what, Karam, that's like accountability efforts on behalf of Syrians everywhere. I mean, universal jurisdiction is our only feasible option at this point. We know that the Security Council was not going to make a referral on the situation in Syria at large to the ICC, and you know, our options are confined. And we know that accountability is going to be a long-term process. So this communication is no different. We have heard from other attorneys who have submitted communications that it takes about 1.5 to 2 years to get a response. And some of those attorneys have made active efforts in terms of lobbying. And we haven't necessarily done that, but it's something that we're looking into, mostly because of ethical reasons. We've stayed away from influencing the OTP. I think we very much feel that the prosecutor should not be a political party, and they should be making judgments on the merits, or they should be making decisions on the merits of cases. So it's something that we're toying with internally, and we want to be able to push this case forward as much as we can.
Right, and by now I think Syrians have realized that efforts for justice and accountability could consume decades and longer. But it's an effort, and it's there and keeps it within the stack of files at the ICC. So that's a success so far. Are you aware of other human rights organizations that actually tackle the same issue and escalated to the ICC in communications or whatsoever?
So does
that strengthen the case as well you're trying to make?
Yeah, so in terms of Greece going to the ICC, we are really the only ones that have submitted. Now, other organizations, like an organization called Wofrontiks, they have submitted similar arguments, but on behalf of the situation in Libya, for example, or refugees crossing from Libya over to Europe. So in that regard.
Italy.
Exactly.
So it's a different arena in a way.
Different area, similar issues, but different area. So in terms of Greece, we are really the only ones. Now, that being
the same
said,
behavior, and Frontex is the culprit again, for
very
example.
similar, correct. And Frontex is definitely involved. That being said, it's a little bit different at the regional level. Now, ultimately, we submitted this case to the ICC, this communication to the ICC, because we felt like we had exhausted all of our other legal remedies. And by that, I mean that you can't go to a court in Greece and get a favorable an end to all of these policies. And we've seen a lot of cases go before the European Court of Human Rights. And there are some really incredible attorneys working in Greece, directly with refugees and asylum seekers to submit those cases before the European Court of Human Rights. And we call those, as a lawyer, we call those cases strategic litigation. So basically, it's when an issue, you're trying to combat a broader systematic issue. And so you submit a case for an individual that's very much tailored, basically like the perfect complainant. You submit that perfect complainant.
You pick one of those refugees who are pushed back and you make it an individual case. And
exactly.
Exactly.
And so there are a lot of really incredible organizations that have submitted those cases before the European Court of Human Rights. And yet, despite all of those cases, Greece has done nothing to change its behavior. There was a recent case, for example, earlier this month, so towards the beginning of July, of 11 Afghans, I believe it was, including, I think it was 8 children, if I remember right. So 11 Afghans, including 8 children who were killed as a result of a pushback. Essentially what was happening is there was 27 people total on a small dinghy boat. Greek authorities came and maneuvered their boat through their larger vessel, their speed vessel, and the boat ended up capsizing. Well, what ended up happening? Greek authorities brought a case against the Syrian who was driving the boat, trying to get people across, because there's always someone who has to kind of maneuver the
sacrifice sheep.
Exactly. They sentenced this guy to over 100 years in prison and gave him a fine. Well, the Court of Appeals in Greece came back and said, okay, that was a bit extreme. Let's lower his sentence to 10 years. Even so, was it this guy's fault? So what happened was a group of lawyers brought a case on behalf of some of the survivors to the European Court of Human Rights. And it was a game changer in the sense that the European Court of Human Rights said that the Greek courts, their logic was flawed when they decided that the Syrian guy Should it?
The Syrian guy didn't kill them. He was another refugee trying to reach safety, but the action by the Greeks is what killed them.
Exactly. So the European Court of Human Rights ruled that. They also acknowledged the fact that many of the survivors who ended up being detained later by Greek authorities were treated in a horrible manner.
After the trauma they had to go through.
After the trauma that they had to go through, only for them to go into Greek custody and be treated horribly and had their human rights violated once again. Yeah. So again, another example of a positive decision by the European Court of Human Rights, and yet we don't see Greece taking any actions to change their behavior, which means our only alternative is to go to the ICC.
I remember chatting with people who had to go through the same thing, and after we released our article, the Greek Minister of Immigration called us liars by names, me and my colleague Patrick Kingsley. They took the time and effort to call us liars, but they really didn't take any time or effort in order to try to stop, and their behavior persisted. It continued after our expose, after other people worked on such reporting. But still, I mean, these actions have been repetitive and they are making headlines, right?
Absolutely.
And I think parliamentarians in some of the European countries are really keeping this file in the center of discussions within Europe. And I think that, as far as I know, according to what I read, that led to some pressure on Frontex. So could you, I mean, of course, the communication from SJAC and others might be, now overwhelmed by the bureaucracy of the ICC, etc. But the media doesn't wait, and there is always a trial by media, and I believe that's ongoing, and that led to some changes within Frontex. Are you aware of those?
Yeah, so I mean, we saw the head of Frontex resign, which was a great step in the sense that, again, the guy knew what was going on, and his statements indicated that he was perpetuating those crimes. And it wasn't just him. Again, I think you said this earlier, that crimes are being committed at the highest echelons. They're being planned at the highest echelons of these entities, whether it's the Greek government or whether it's Frontex. I mean, the crimes persist, yet we had the Greek prime minister call this fake news. The Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs calling this fake news. So I mean, Frontex itself, we saw the head of Frontex resign. There's also been efforts to kind of examine Frontex's behavior. The results have not been exactly positive. It's a lot of denial of their behavior, and yet, as you said, there's a trial by media, and the media continues to circulate this, to find and circulate evidence of all of their criminal behavior.
And there is like really disappointment within European communities and their leadership, the hypocrisy of it. On one hand, they say everyone is welcome, and if they arrive in European soil, then they are entitled to be asylum seekers. But on the other hand, they fund and turn a blind eye on the activities of partner countries, other European countries, and European funded entities like Frontex, etc. How is the situation in the Aegean now? Do we still receive such reports that these activities, these actions are still ongoing?
Absolutely. And, Karam, it doesn't stop at the Aegean Sea. I mean, we see it at the northern land border as well. What we've seen is that the tactics used by the authorities have frankly become more manipulative in a way, and even more dangerous. So in the north, we see that we've gotten a lot of reports of people being captured, detained.
Via Bulgaria.
Even before that, when we're talking at the Greek-Turkish border, we know that people, we know that people have been detained, they've been held in black sites, and then they've been put in vehicles and literally driven to the Evros River, where they are, again, put on little boats and told to cross the river. A couple of months ago, I got a call from a colleague of mine who was trying to get help for a situation of Syrians, a group of Syrians, including pregnant women, who were stuck on this little island in the river. And, you know, they look to one side and they see Greek authorities, and they look to the other side and they see Turkish authorities. And they are like, what do we do? We're stuck on this little island with nowhere to go. Nobody wants us. We have no food, no water. And, you know, eventually they ended up, the Turks ended up taking them back. And you know what? The people tried again and again to cross over into Greece and finally made it into Greece. So the fact that the Greek government continues to commit these crimes is very clearly not the solution to the problem, right? At the end of the day, people are fleeing conflict zones because they have like well-founded fears of being persecuted. And when you have that much fear, what is crossing the Mediterranean Sea when you've had bombs over your head? You know, you're making the choice to put your baby on this little boat because you obviously feel that you have no other choice. And so people are going to keep trying because they have to. So if you want to solve the problems, go to the source, you know, breed a solution to the conflict in Syria, breed a solution to the issues in Afghanistan, but there needs to be a reprioritization. Otherwise, you know, migration is not going to stop. It's just not going to stop.
Yeah. Another punitive aspect to deter refugees from even thinking of making it to Greece is keeping all those asylum seekers in really poor conditions, poor accommodation conditions, and all of these makeshift camps in Greece for lengthy periods of time. And some people describe it as a punitive policy in order to give a message to people who, even if they make it and they're not pushed back, they might actually end up stuck in one of these tents or camps for like 3 to 4 years in really, really poor conditions. So where are we on that front? Is Europe going to relocate these refugees stuck in Greece at some stage, or it seems like Greece has the monopoly over the fate of these
I wish
people.
I wish European countries would step up a little bit more and to take people. I could tell you, so at the time that I was working on Lesbos, for example, I was working in an infamous camp called Moria. Moria has since burned to the ground. And people are now in this makeshift camp that's very much militarized, become militarized, and right by the sea. It's lead infested. I mean, it's just a horrible situation. But I could tell you that when I was in Moria, I can't tell you, Karam, how many women I knew that were wearing diapers at night because they were too afraid to go to the bathroom because of the sexual violence. They were afraid that they were going to be raped. And so they were wearing diapers at night. Like, that's how desperate the circumstances were. I can't tell you the number of people that had just horrible diseases, things like scabies that were just making them really uncomfortable. Food was very much inevitable. And the day-to-day violence, of course, is a result of that. I mean, how many days in a row fights would break out between people waiting in the bread line? But you know what? That's what happens when you have people who are geographically confined.
It's grounds for frustration and aggression, right?
Exactly. And you know, and I'll say that frustration manifests in so many different ways, right? It manifests in those fights. It manifests in sexual violence against women. It manifests in you know, the most traumatic ways that we can imagine as humans. And again, I think that really feeds into this method that's being used by the Greek authorities to make people so miserable that they would rather go back to Turkey, where, you know, they had no rights, where they, you know, it takes how long if you can get a permit to be able to reside there, to work there, to have a decent stay. People are just miserable no matter where they go. And if Europe calls themselves the bastion of human rights, then they need to step up and to handle this issue eventually.
And you add on top of all these miserable conditions, the global pandemic, and it coincided with the burning down of Moria as well. So imagine the psychological state of the residents. of these camps. So it's really horrible, and hopefully there will be like a solution to all of this soon.
Yeah. You know, Karam, one thing I'll say is that it is very depressing to talk about all of this sometimes, and it's easy to get overwhelmed by it. But, you know, I also feel like when I was on the islands, I also, while I saw the worst parts of humanity, you also see the most beautiful parts of humanity. You know, the fact that people can figure out a way to survive despite these conditions. The fact that, you know, parents can continue to love their kids and do whatever they can to protect them. You know, in terms of COVID, you know, people couldn't get stuff into the camps. There was no cleaning supplies. There was nothing like that. You have no running water. If you do have running water, it's like icy cold. It's just, people are miserable, right? Obviously, the health circumstances were awful. And yet people can come together. They can figure out how to sew masks and distribute those masks. You know, they find a way to work collectively. And I think that's the most beautiful aspect of all of this, is that despite the extreme violence in so many different ways, there's always a little bit of hope. And at least for me, I feel that I've learned more from my clients than they have ever gotten from me. I could get them off the island, but they've given me so much more because of that.
And this is the good-hearted nature of these people. If you put them in the right circumstances, in a humane circumstances, and forgiving environment, not in the current harsh, miserable conditions they have to endure every morning they wake up. Are you optimistic that the ICC might end up doing something?
I want to be optimistic. I'm a little up in the air, Karam. I want to be more optimistic, but I'm also realistic about the fact that as much as the Office of the Prosecutor shouldn't be a political entity, there are a lot of factors that go into play. If that wasn't the case, we would have seen other issues go a lot further. But, you know, the court is only successful when states want to engage with it, which means that down to the money, right? How the court is getting their fundings is somewhat dependent on state involvement. And essentially, you make enough states mad, and there goes the credibility of the court. So in this case in particular, we know that a lot of states are involved, including European states.
Germany, Italy.
Right. States that happen to be big funders and supporters of the court in general. So there's a lot of complex layers to this. I would hope that Karim Khan and his team will make the right decision, that they will act on these serious violations, especially in light of what is going on in European soil in the context of Ukraine. You know, the Office of the Prosecutor is very quick to act, very quick to allocate authority, to allocate, you know, money and resources. Exactly. And so I would hope that they would make the right decision and to see how grave the circumstances are, and to kind of move an investigation forward. But, you know, I'm also, again, the politics of the situation is one thing. I'm also cognizant of rhetoric around, you know, people of color when it comes to being refugees in Europe. I mean, I hate to put it like this, but Ukrainian refugees were allowed into other countries so easily. I mean, countries like Hungary were accepting Ukrainians like, I mean, they were happy to do it. And yet we know that Hungarian authorities are very quick. Yep, Poland as well. These are countries that we have seen them, we submitted evidence to the ICC of people being stripped naked, beaten by the police, had all of their money, all of their goods stolen for them, and sent back across the border. And yet all of a sudden, you know, you have Ukrainians that come through and they're accepted openly. I will say, even though on one hand it's frustrating, on the other hand, I'm happy for Ukrainians that they never had to deal with what our people have had to go through. And for what we had to go through, we want Ukrainians to be treated with respect and to be treated with dignity, and they should be. You know, they should have their human rights, you know, taken into account. But it is indicative of a broader issue.
And we would like our people to be treated like Ukrainians at some stage.
Yeah, of
we
course.
have another wave of migrants, etc.
I
mean, it's not like Ukrainians. They would love our people to be treated the right way. That's it. And there is no many ways to treat people in need, fleeing bombs and chemical weapons. There is only one way, which is like give them shelter and protection. We are actually sort of out of time, but if you have any last thing you would like to tell our viewers.
Just a thank you to the audience for being so engaged with SJAC over the years and for trusting us by giving us their documentation, by being witnesses and being courageous enough to engage in these accountability processes. And specifically, a thank you to all of the people who were brave enough to give us information anonymously in particular, to the International Criminal Court, to the Office of the Prosecutor to submit this. And thanks to you, Karam, for addressing the issue.
No, of course, and thanks for giving me the platform. So I would like to thank you, Nasma. Shukran Hawaya.
Shukran.
I think we would love to have you more in coming episode. I know you're working your Arabic, so hopefully the viewers can hear from you directly.
أقدر أحكي بس من أريد أحكي, I get a little nervous. So
Okay. Well, you did good. Thanks. And thank you everyone for watching this episode, and I will see you in the next episode. إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله.
تحياتي للجميع. سلامات نسمة.